wrong that he was intending to do. But none could drive him, but none could influence him, none could divert his mind, none could affect him, nor none could help change his mind from having his revengeful claim and demand, the demand of the penalty from Antonio for having failed to keep the contract which he had entered with Shylock at the time of borrowing the 3,000 ducats. And no one could influence him, convince him, divert his mind, change his mind from having that revengeful demand and claim of justice be granted to him, his case be heard in court by the duke and the jury, and that he be granted justice. And nobody could influence him enough, help to change his mind, divert his mind from claiming to have that revengeful demand of his bond, the contract that he had entered into with Antonio when he had lent him the 3,000 ducats which Antonio had borrowed from him. Then Jessica spoke up and said, "When I was with him, I have heard him swear to Tubal and to cuss his countrymen that he would rather have Antonio's flesh than 20 times the value of the sum that he did owe him." Jessica, his own daughter, stood as a testimony, as a witness, and revealed her father's secret to Bassanio, trying to make him aware that her father was bent on having revenge and not the money. He was intending to take the life of Antonio. And what did she exactly say? She exactly said, when I was with him, when she was living with her father in his house, before she had eloped with Lorenzo. Eloped means had run away from home with the intention to get married to Lorenzo. So she said when she was living with her father in his house, she had overheard him say, she had overheard him making that serious and very earnest and in a way sacred promise in the presence of the other two tribesmen, namely Tubal and Cuss. She said that she had heard her father swear very solemnly, very seriously, very earnestly, 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 in a sacred manner, taking that pledge, making that promise to himself that in the presence of his fellow Jewish friends, Tubal and Khas, that he would rather have Antonio's 1 pound of flesh from any part of his body than to accept 20 times the amount of money if offered to him. 20 times the value which he had lent out to Antonio. He would not accept it. He would rather have that 1 pound of flesh precisely from Antonio's chest, rather accept 20 times the value of the sum of money that he had lent out to Antonio. That he did owe him, that Antonio had to pay back to him. Even if Antonio was willing to pay back 20 times more, 20 times into 3,000, he would not accept it. He would rather have that 1 pound of flesh, which he had very cunningly inserted or mentioned in the contract, which he had very cunningly inveigled, inveigled, very cunningly had got Antonio to sign it, asking him to treat it as a joke and not take it very seriously. And then he went on to say, went on to say, and I know, my lord, if law, authority and power deny not, it will go hard with poor Antonio. And he said that she knew very well, she knew her father and his wicked intentions, and how stubborn and headstrong he was, and how much he hated Antonio with all his heart and soul. She said that she knew very well that if the law, if the judiciary, if the duke and the jury, and if the authorities, the important officers holding different ranks in the administration of Venice, and if all the people possessing or having influence and powers in the city of Venice, if they all together did not stop Shylock, then if they did not stop Shylock, if they did not prevent him, then it would go hard with poor Antonio. That means it would be very difficult for Antonio. It would mean very painful for Antonio, and it would mean that Antonio would certainly lose the case in the court. It would be a very bad case for him in court, because Shylock had very smartly prepared a document within the ambits, within AMBIT, ambit means within the limits of the law, to trap Antonio. And then Portia in reply said, "It is your dear friend, is it your dear friend that is thus in trouble?" She asked, "Was it his good friend that he had described to her earlier, the most intimate, the kindest, the best natured, ever ready to help others, always motivating others, and never intending to cause harm to others? Was it that good friend who was in trouble at that point of time. And Bassanio agreed and said to her, yes, it was the dearest friend to him. He said Antonio was the dearest friend to him. And he went on to describe Antonio's personality. And he said that, yes, indeed, he was the dearest friend to him. He was the kindest man he had ever known. And he went on to say next that Antonio was the best condition and unwearied spirit in doing courtesies. He meant to say that Antonio was highly good natured, a very good natured man, and a man who was untiring, never tired, always very highly energetic and cheerful in his soul and spirit, always untiring, never tired in his approach and attitude towards others, and ever ready to do good, help others in need. That is the meaning of unwearied spirit, a man who was untiring, always cheerful and encouraging others. In doing courtesies, he was always ever ready to help others in need and was always kind to them. And one in whom the ancient Roman honor more appears than any other that draws breath in Italy, meaning to say, and Antonio was a model of this thing called the ancient Roman honor. Antonio was a perfect model of this ancient Roman honor, meaning to say that Antonio had this perfect sense of loyalty towards his friend and his country. He was a very loyal person towards his friend, and he was a very loyal man towards his country, a true patriot. Patriot, patriot, a person who truly loved his country. And this principle was so perfectly imbibed in him. This principle of the ancient Roman honor was so perfectly imbibed in him and was very evident, very visible, very clear in the way he treated and behaved than any other man who was living and breathing at that point of time in Venice. In other words, gentlemen, in simple terms, he said that Antonio had this important principle of Roman honor so perfectly imbibed in him. And what is this ancient Roman honor? Before we move on, let me finish this. He said Antonio was the only man who imbibed in him so very perfectly this principle, this moral value of the ancient Roman honor than any other man who lived at that moment in Venice. Ancient Roman honor means the Romans believed that a man should be very loyal to one's friends and to one's country. Gentlemen, next Portia went on to say, "What sum owes he the Jew?" Portia asked, how much money was Antonio in debt, or did he owe to Shylock? And Bassanio says, "For me, 3,000 ducats." And he said it was because of him that he had borrowed the 3,000 ducats and not for himself, for Antonius' self had he borrowed that money. And he had to pay back 3,000 ducats to clear his debt and free him of all the charges which Shylock was holding against him. And Portia says, "What no more? What no more?" Portia said. "Pay him 6,000 ducats and deface the bond." And Portia was shocked to know that it was such a small amount of money that he had borrowed. And she immediately said that instead of paying him 3,000 ducats, pay him 6,000 ducats and get the contract defaced, have it nullified, have it cancelled, have it done away with. And if that would not satisfy the Jew, double 6,000, make it 12,000. And if that would not satisfy the Jew, have it multiplied by 3, make 12,000 into 36,000 ducats, pay it to the Jew before a friend such as Antonio was, and as he had been described by Bassanio to be hurt even to that extent, that smallest extent of losing one single strand of hair from his head for her husband's fault, for Bassanio's fault. "First go with me," and she said, but before doing so, he go along with her to church, accompany her to church and get married to her, exchange their oaths, take their promises to remain faithful to each other before God in church, and then immediately leave for Venice to help his friend and rescue him. For never shall you lie by Portia's side with an unquiet soul." And she said, for she would not want a husband who would always be worried in his mind and who would always be anxious and unhappy, always his mind occupied with thoughts, to live with her in her house. So she gave him permission to leave immediately after they would be married in church. Unquiet means with a restless and worried mind. "You shall have gold to pay the petty debt 20 times over." And she said after they would get married and when it would be time for him to leave immediately, he could have enough gold to pay back that 3,000 ducats they had borrowed 20 times more. And she called that debt petty. Petty means a small amount, a paltry amount. And he could have all the gold to pay the debt 20 times over. When it is paid, and she said when it would be cleared, to kindly bring his good friend to Belmont so that she could meet with him and know him. And during his absence, when he would not be in Belmont, when he would go to help and rescue his friend Antonio, she and her friend, maid, advisor and confidant, 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 meaning a person in whom she could share her secrets, knowing that she would not reveal or disclose it to anyone. And Larissa she's referring to. They would live as unmarried ladies and as widows, living a very simple and a very quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the luxuries of the palace and the comforts of the palace. Come away, and she urged him to go along with her immediately. For, she said, you shall hence upon your wedding day bid your friends welcome. And she said that since he was getting married to her and it was his wedding day, that he should be cheerful and cheerfully welcome his friends to Belmont. Since, she said, since he was dear brought, since his good friend Antonio had risked his life, he had put his life in line, he had sacrificed his life in order to help him to come to Belmont to impress, participate, and take part in the lottery of caskets, and finally having been successful, winning her as his wife, as Antonio had paid a very high sum, risking his life for him, she would value him in the same manner and love him in the same manner as his good friend had cared and had been affectionate towards him. But let me hear the letter of your friend. But before that, she said she would want to know what exactly the message read, the message that was mentioned in that particular letter. And Bassanio read out the letter to her, and he said, sweet Bassanio, my ships are all out at your pardon please, because my battery is dying out, but let me just complete this for you. Sweet Bassanio, my ships have all miscarried, the letter read, addressing Bassanio with respect and love, as sweet that all his ships that had ventured out had all failed, and there was no news of any of his ships returning with profits. The creditors, the people who he had borrowed from, were growing merciless and cruel, demanding their money back and hounding him and chasing him and creating trouble, demanding for the money to be paid back by him. And my estate is very low, and he said his source of income was very low. In fact, it was nothing at all. And then he went on to say, my bond to the Jew is forfeit. He said that he had failed to keep the contract that he had entered with a Jew when he had borrowed that sum of 3,000 ducats from him. And since in paying it, and if he were to pay it, then it would be impossible for him to live any longer. And he said next that the letter read next that all the money, love and respect that he owed to him would be considered paid and cleared by Antonio if only Bassanio would pay him a visit once before his death. Notwithstanding, use your pleasure. But the letter mentioned that he could use his own discretion, his own freedom, he could at his own pleasure come to visit him. There was no need for him to come and visit him because of the letter that he had sent. He could come at his own convenient time, at his own suitable time, a time that would please him the most, at his own discretion, following his own wishes, and not be forced to come because of the letter that he had received. If it be not for his affection for him, if it was not out of his love for him as a friend, there was no need for him to come just because he had received the letter from him. Portia says, "Oh love, dispatch all business and be gone." And Portia immediately said, calling him "Oh love" with respect, to finish up his business immediately in Belmont, get married to her, take the gold and leave immediately for Venice to rescue, redeem and save his good friend Antonio. And Bassanio said, "Since I have a good leave to go away," and Bassanio said, since he had her permission to leave right away immediately, he would be quick about it, make haste, quickly make arrangements so that he could leave for Venice. But till I come again, but till he returned back to Belmont from Venice, he said, "No bed shall e'er be guilty of my stay." He said that he would not rest at all, and he would not allow any bed to feel guilty of him resting in it. And he would not allow any kind of rest to waste time and keep him away, and he would not allow any rest to come in between, separate him and her for a long period of time. He would not allow, the last line,